Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure, great privilege to be joining you today. What I'd like to talk about for the next 25 minutes before we go back into Q&A is what I think is the World Health Organization has identified as the infodemic. And this is this parallel battle that we have as we see the spread of the second and third wave of the coronavirus, is to try and fight back against those who are spreading disinformation about the causes of the virus, about our reaction to the virus, and about the potential vaccinations for the virus. The people who are organizing campaigns of deception, which are counter to public health. So that infodemic, I think we can start thinking about strategies to flatten the curve of the virus, I think are very analogous to the kind of strategies we need to consider about how to flatten the curve of that infodemic. So what I'm going to talk about is not necessarily the detailed research or the suggestions. I know, for example, Ilan will talk to us a little later, has done some great research into this particular problem. I want to talk about my own personal story from about 10 years ago, working at the beginnings of what became the misinformation crisis. We wouldn't have called it that, up to the present time, where I'm now working on another project that is combating misinformation as it's manifesting itself right now. So what I want to talk about is thinking, and I'm just going to share my screen here with you and share some thoughts, which, as I say, are very much from the perspective of somebody that's been thinking about this problem for about a decade, how we flatten that out of the curve of the infodemic. And so I want to step back before my first journeys into startup world. I want to go right back to the beginning of my career. So I became a journalist back in 1991, full-time at least. This was the first publicity shot for me when I joined RTE. And beside the fact that I haven't changed a bit, what I'm very much struck by is the change in technology around the distribution of information today compared to this time back 30 years ago. If you look there, for example, there's no sign of a mobile phone at all. We were disconnected from that. That terminal is a dumb terminal. There was no internet connected to that computer. And if you look behind me, those in that photograph, those tapes are all these sort of magnetic reel-to-reel tapes that we used to slice up with razor blades and put back together again to build radio programs, if you remember those, before there were podcasts. So it's just a reminder that in a single career, mine, there has been such a radical change in the way that we distribute information and the volume of information, who distributes it, who's the gatekeeper. And I think that's at the heart of this question. So I went on from that humble beginning to live my dream. I was obviously Prime Time's anchor. I was the Washington correspondent, but it was really only when I was a foreign correspondent that I was at my happiest. And every foreign correspondent will tell you there's one place or one country or one topic gets under their skin. In my case, it was Iran. I found the nation, its history, its progress, absolutely fascinating. This is me in the city of Esfahan in Iran back around 2008, I think. As you can see there, you know, making TV is like making sausages. It's something you don't want to see happening. And in my case, I think about that time, I was getting increasingly disillusioned about the fact that it took such an enormous effort to describe what was going on the ground in a place like Iran. About the same time, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube started to become more important in distributing information. And in 2009, I remember a light bulb moment for me where protests on the streets of Tehran against a contested election. In that case, very few foreign correspondents get into the country. I didn't. I relied upon what I could see on Twitter. And I started to understand that the balance of power had shifted from the correspondent, the gatekeeper, to young people like this woman who had a camera phone and a connection with a social network and were at the right place at the right time to describe history happening. That was that light bulb moment for me. First of all, it scared me and other journalists. We were no longer the center of the story, but it gave me inspiration. It made me feel like, what would happen if I set up a company in which it was a partnership between these authentic, real stories on the ground and old-fashioned journalism? And that became the start of Storyful. That was the first social media news agency. We set it up in 2010. We were lucky in that year was the beginning of what we now know as the Arab Spring. And so Storyful was responsible for scouring the internet for these platforms like Twitter and YouTube and finding those amazing images or testimonies that would change the way we see history unfolding. In the early days, what struck us most, and I never forget seeing this photograph from Tahrir Square in Cairo, was the joy, the outpouring of this democratic spirit in the early days of social media, where dissident movements were using social media and in some ways sort of agencies like Storyful to get out the message of these decentralized grassroots networks of change. It still happens today. Social media is still a powerhouse in terms of promoting movements, decentralized movements like Me Too, Black Lives Matter. So we saw that early promise. We were also seeing in places like Iran, groups like this Facebook group, Stealthy Freedom, which was a group of women protesting against the enforced hijab in Iran, using social media in a very joyous way to promote this democratic potential of action organized through social media. So I have to say, I still, and I was then, very much a believer in the democratic potential of this new media. At the same time, around the same time, we started to see the ugly side. We started to see the enemies of democracy realize that social media gave them a way to try dominate debate and suppress the democratic spirit of women like this. So we started to see, for example, social media used as war by other means. On the left-hand side here, you see the Israeli Defense Forces tweeting a warning to reporters not to go near any groups, the Hamas group. And then right after that, you see the armed wing of Hamas coming back and obviously criticizing and attacking the Israelis. So war was happening on social media. And then when we could see on the right-hand side, the horror of militant extremist groups realizing they could hijack the sort of discourse of social media, but also create sort of cinematic style terror. For example, the beheading of hostages, to try and dominate discourse and to try and use social media to essentially amplify not just the message, but this sense of terrorizing their opponents. So again, these anti-democratic forces could see in social media a way of fighting back against the democratic promise of those dissident movements. We also started to see another thing as well, which was organized groups that would fake information. For example, here on the left-hand side, there was a group that hacked the Associated Press account to say, I think this was back in 2012, that Barack Obama, the president at the time, had been injured in an explosion. And right below it in this graphic, you see that was the stock market spike downwards in response to that fake tweet. We started to see, for example, in the case of the crash of a civilian airliner, people coming online trying to promote the narrative that the plane had been shot down by some state actor and using false information to back up that claim. So we started to see the beginnings of disinformation. And I would categorize that as different to fake news or misinformation, as organized campaigns of deception with the intent of causing real world political outcomes. And I think that's the great problem that we were addressing back then. So clearly, I can talk about the theory of what we were seeing, but maybe I'll show you a practical example of what we were doing. We were using essentially investigative forensic science, almost like intelligence gathering, to try and establish the truth and context about major world events like this one, the Malaysian Airlines being downed over the Ukraine. We were also using new techniques, and I'll just show you a quick video to describe exactly what Storyful's technological advances were to try and back up this work.
We are part of a golden age of journalism and storytelling. Everybody now is a storyteller. There's hundreds of hours of YouTube video uploaded every single minute. But when everybody's telling a story, which stories are worth listening to?
Storyful's first social media news agency in the world.
One of the big stories we've been covering today is Yemen. We found this pretty dramatic video. So what we want to do is go to Google Maps, establish the location. We find the building here, which matches exactly. And now we're going to attempt to get clearance for the content and provide it to our clients for use. Hi, my name is Joe Galvin. I'm a journalist with the news agency Storyful.com.
We've really prided ourselves in trying to build technology matched with expert journalism to basically mine the social web.
Anything that's happening in social media anywhere in the world, on any platform, we find it, we curate it, we post it.
Technology has really made our job different in that we can get the stories that are meaningful and truthful out there.
Google tools and services have been critical for us since the very beginning, from translation to 24-hour Google Hangouts. When human skill matches really cool technology, it's greater than the sum of the parts. And that's the reason why Storyful has had such traction.
It's about storytelling, being able to match that with technology to find the stories worth telling. How do we take the pulse of the internet to get to the truth and really contextualize it, editorialize it?
Defining the narrative, that's the search for truth. And that's what Storyful is doing, bringing an authenticity to storytelling.
I get up every day because I believe journalism plays an incredibly important role in the power of user-generated content.
It makes me feel empowered that social media today is such a vital role in people being able to share their stories.
Helping people tell their stories, their truth. We take it very seriously. It's a source of great pride.
Social media is going to be media. Social journalism will be journalism. And I'm looking forward to the time when Storyful will become absolutely standard within journalism.
So clearly, I'm still very proud of the work that remarkable team did. We were a team of about 40 journalists when the company was bought by News Corporation at the end of 2013. It's gone on to become now a team of about 200 across the world. Many of the people who left Storyful have gone on to become incredibly pioneering journalists in places like the New York Times and CNN. But, I think you can also hear then a certain sense of naivety about what would happen with social media in the years to come. So let's just think about Storyful being the first news agency of that first wave of disinformation. I think what we learned, and probably the biggest mistake, if I was to own up to a personal failure in all of this, was to start thinking about the fight back against disinformation like a war. So we would describe this as like, we were fighting back against the people that were weaponizing social media, that it was us against them, and that eventually we would beat them. But that wasn't the way to think about it, because a fundamental change had happened in the way that we distribute and consume information. And that was the thing we failed to understand in the early days, that really this was not about a war. This was a public health crisis, and it was a global health crisis, because we're sitting at the change in the way information is consumed as well as produced. And let's just think about that for a moment, because how people consume information, I think, is the critical point in the second wave of disinformation. It used to be that people would sit in front of the telly. This is back, let's say, in the 60s. And a couple of people on television, the gatekeepers, would tell them what was going on in the world that day. There was a scarcity of information. People were passive consumers. That was the old reality. And in the space of my career, there's this new reality where everybody can be a storyteller. Everybody has the means of production to get their story out there. And now we as consumers are faced with this tsunami of information every day that baffles us. And so that's a real problem. And Nate Silver, one of the preeminent pollsters in the US, has written a great book about this called The Signal and the Noise. And he's shown that every time we have a technological advance in how we consume information, like way back in Gutenberg's time, when the spread of information in Europe created violence, we now at this point where information growth has outpaced our ability to understand it. And that's causing major problems for the individual consumer. Added to that is the way that social platforms work. They don't rank information by quality. They rank it by how emotional it is. They want to develop in us a feeling of joy or a feeling of fear or a feeling of outrage. Anything to get us riled up, because that's the way they make money, through advertising. So all these new artificial intelligence systems, the recommendation systems, the algorithms, not only are they serving us up more information than ever, they are designed to make us feel some emotion. And that is a recipe for disaster. And that's what I think has created the kind of disinformation environment we have now. People are overwhelmed, but they're also forced into a period where they're always emotional about the information that they're getting. Now, the reason that's so important is because, think back to it. These are two people that I read very extensively when I was younger. George Orwell, you will know, predicted Big Brother would tell us what to think. But interesting on the right-hand side is the figure of Aldous Huxley, wrote a book called Brave New World, who I think correctly predicted an environment where people were totally overwhelmed by things that made them feel good. And they became passive, and they became, in many ways, unable to sort out what was true from what was lie. And that's where we've got to. And so when you see Donald Trump in the early days of his presidency trying to sow distrust of the wider media, you saw the secret of a strategy that has been adopted by people like Trump and people like him in Russia, in Brazil, even in the Philippines. What they know is they only need to sow distrust of the media They don't need to be believed themselves to achieve their ends. And this is what Steve Bannon, one of Trump's advisors, used to say. He used to have a phrase, pardon the French, flooding the zone with shit. What he meant by that was, as long as you can persuade everybody that everything should be distrusted, you will achieve your goals. Reducing the level of trust allows you to achieve your political objectives. And this is Jay Rosen, one of my most respected media critics, put it really beautifully in the last election when he said, when the people running the government are determined to lower trust in everything, there's no way of stopping them. And so that's what we've seen. We've seen disinformation from the top down as well as from the grassroots up. And that's the second wave, I would argue, of disinformation that we're now facing. Gone are the days when it was only elite groups or shadowy networks that could spread disinformation. In this second wave, what is critical is that those of us who believe in the health of information as being a critical component of a healthy democracy and a healthy society need to be thinking about how do we address this kind of new disinformation environment. And obviously the first thing we can do, and certainly I joined Twitter after I left Storyful, a great team. I was based here in Dublin, but I soon realized that the platforms themselves didn't have the answers. The technology companies weren't built to solve this problem. So myself and my former Storyful colleague, Anya Kerr, have joined together again, and we've set up another startup called Kinzen. So what Kinzen does is essentially try to take these advances in technology and help editors fight back against disinformation. So if you think about Storyful, we're the next generation. We're leaning into this technology advances in machine learning and AI to help editors scale the fight back against this second wave of disinformation. So what we do, for example, is we allow researchers and fact checkers and journalists to go in and search through YouTube and audio platforms using natural language processing. We take out the particularly concerning words, the evolving language that defines disinformation campaigns, and help researchers start to tag it, understand it better. And from there, we can spot, for example, campaigns of deception that are being spread from the top down or from the bottom up by looking at the language they're using. We call these dog whistles, where we can start to see a narrative around a public health concern that's being used by these disinformation networks to try and win popular support. What we're also doing here is we're taking all the data from the fact checkers and from these researchers and these reporters and creating a sort of a Wikipedia style database that helps us build much higher quality machine learning models that can start to process the search for disinformation at scale. I don't want to bamboozle you with the technology behind it, but essentially what we're trying to do is help technology companies, news publishers, and others who are concerned about disinformation in society to try and scale the response to what is now such a vast problem. When we started Storyful, there were 25 hours of YouTube content loaded every minute. Today, there are 500 hours of YouTube content. We're trying to reduce the amount of content that we need to look at to solve the disinformation problem. But a couple of observations, because this fight goes way beyond companies like ours or even the technology companies. We are seeing successful experiments by technology companies to reduce the friction, i.e. to stop people from, reacting to the gut feeling they've got to share a piece of content on Twitter. We're starting to see people being reminded that this may actually be false information. So this friction is really important. We're also starting to see, I think, journalists cotton on to the fact that the old way of, writing sensational headlines about health information is the wrong way to proceed. And I'll give you an example. We've started to see in recent months a particular clip of a broadcast from a reputable news station in Florida talking about a mumps outbreak. And the first 10 seconds of this clip is being used by multiple agents of the anti-vaccination movement to suggest vaccines don't work. Just look at this, first 10 seconds and then the full report.
There is a mumps outbreak at the University of Florida, and now the school is desperately trying to stop this from spreading. 10 News reporter Liz Crawford talked with one student who got the mumps, and Liz, there are 24 cases of the mumps on campus. All 24 students were vaccinated. What gives?
Courtney, that's really the scary part. U.S. students are required to receive their MMR vaccine before they can attend school. That's pretty standard. Every one of these students were vaccinated, but still ended up with the mumps. Today, during a Facebook Live conversation I had on the 10 News Facebook page, that's what you wanted to know more about. How did vaccinated students end up with the mumps? Well, according to the CDC, 2 doses of the MMR vaccine are only 88% effective at preventing mumps. Mumps outbreaks can still occur and are more likely at universities and close-knit communities. That's why Kaylin Heron now wishes she had a 3rd vaccine.
So clearly there, the headline, the one that really does support the public health initiative, is the very last sentence. But that's not what got distributed. The anti-vaxxers out there took the first 10 seconds, the clickbait sensational lead in. And that's where obviously we have to be really conscious, not just for journalists, for any public communicator that's trying to express information about health, to be first, to lead with the statement that you want to promote, to pre-bunk people that might come along and cast doubt on public health information. So it's just a good example of how the internet now is full of people that are looking for ways to start informally sharing disinformation through influencer networks across the internet. Another good example is we've been watching this year a false narrative spreading that the spread of the 5G next generation wireless network is the cause of the COVID crisis. And look at this, for example, this is a track of all the conversations on Twitter about this false narrative from the very beginning of the year. What's really interesting is that in the end of the day, when you see the spike in about March 15th, that's from a singer online, an influencer, who just picks up this narrative and spreads it. We see a spike. And then about the beginning of April, an internationally known rapper comes out and says, oh, I've just heard this piece of information. And that's when we see the super spreader event. Again, very analogous to the virus itself. It's not a journalist and it's not a government and it's not Donald Trump that promote the spread of this virus. It's an influencer with a wide range of ordinary people who follow them that are the transmission mechanism in this case. So we've got to start thinking about the virus of misinformation in the same way we think about the actual virus, that there will be these super spreaders. Our job is to get ahead of them. And I think that's another example we can look at is the spread of this seemingly innocuous 3 words on the internet in recent months. Save the children. What it is actually one of those dog whistles. It is 3 words that have been hijacked by the QAnon movement, which has emerged from the United States. I won't even go into the kind of craziness of it. It's the accusation of a deep state conspiracy in the US. And to speed the international transmission of this particular conspiracy theory, they have hijacked this hashtag on social media platforms like Instagram, which ostensibly is about ending child trafficking. And what they've done is they've used these words and they've used the spread of misinformation through influencers. For example, wellness, yoga, new age spirituality has been a major super spreader community for QAnon and these 3 words, to the point where you're seeing things like ridiculous contradiction here. People who don't believe in the coronavirus spreading that message through masks. We're also seeing t-shirts on craft platforms like Etsy. Again, this is QAnon. This is a deeply political conspiracy theory spreading through what seems to be a very spiritual wellness type community. And the wellness community themselves, people who are the yoga instructors who've been hijacked by the conspirituality movement, or pastel, QAnon has been called, have been fighting back to disassociate themselves from their community becoming a host for dangerous misinformation. And I think that's what we've got to be thinking about more and more. It's not good enough just for the technology companies to act. They do need to act. It's not good enough just for journalism to be more responsible about the messages that they spread. We have to be thinking about misinformation and disinformation as something that is inside the brains of every individual, potentially. In the amygdala, our fight or flight mechanism, where we react to uncertain and insecure events with bias. We reach out for the information that feels true to us. And that's where we've got to be. In this second wave of disinformation and misinformation, we've got to work out strategies that make the individual citizen the real factor here. In similar ways that we've asked people to wear masks and wash their hands, we have to be thinking about this flattening the curve for this alternative pandemic through the eyes of the ordinary person. How can we help them? Now, as I say, there's other people that can, help us tease through some of the strategies. I think for me, it's summed up by this. We got to be out there. We got to be first. We got to be preempting events like the launch of a successful vaccine next year by pre-bunking what we think might be the counterpoints, by filling the data voids out there with clear information. We can't assume that people will think rationally about something like getting their kids vaccinated. You have to inform them in clear, reasoned, evidence-based communication. So that's the second part. And finally, because this misinformation is spreading among friends and sometimes family, we've got to be respectful of why rational people might believe irrational things. We can't shame them into changing their behaviors. All the evidence suggests that's counterproductive. We have got to think about ourselves as being members of these communities of friends and family and communicate appropriately. Again, I'm going to stop there because I'm looking forward to our Q&A to discuss this. But I hope I've just given you 10 years of condensed experience from a first wave to a second wave of the spread of misinformation and how we might think about taking these high-level debates that used to be the preserve of journalism and technology platforms and thinking about how we can think about combating this information virus literally through grassroots movements that we lead. So that's my challenge, and hopefully we pick it up when we have some Q&A. But thank you.